This review is not spoiler-free and contains content that may be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey, you all know who I am. I know I said I didn't have plans to review Diamond is Unbreakable or Golden Wind, but I'm gonna do it anyway. But first, shot fires at mistakes I made in my previous videos. Skip to the time on screen if you don't care. There aren't just 2 adaptations of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga, there are actually quite a few. Other than the OVA series recapping Stardust Crusaders and the 2012 anime, there's also a live-action movie recapping the first half of Diamond is Unbreakable. If you count the OVA series adapting the spin-off centered around one of DIU's supporting characters, Rohan Kishibe, there's technically 3 adaptations of the manga other than the 2012 series. There was also a movie for Phantom Blood made in the early 2000s, however it was only shown once in Japanese cinemas and has since been lost. Dio could not turn other people into vampires. What he did was turn them into zombies. That's actually dumber than what I thought he was doing, but whatever, anything Dio does doesn't have to make sense. I kinda mentioned this mistake in a shitpost I made a while back, but I mispronounced the name of Part 3's MC. It's Jotaro. I kept saying Jotaro because it just rolled off the tongue better. Another name I got wrong was one of Part 2's villains. It's ACDC. SCDC is the dumb localized name. When I said that the villain taking forever to die would be a recurring thing, I showed footage of one of Part 2's introductory villains, even though that's a terrible example. The reason for that is I played the wrong clip. I meant to play one of Putt Putt, but I didn't. Now that I've repented for my death-worthy sins, let's talk about Part 4 finally. While I don't think it's as good as Battle Tendency, Diamond is Unbreakable came as a pleasant surprise for me as it improved on some of the negative aspects I found in Stardust Crusaders, while still managing to tell its own interesting story with a good mixture of drama, action, and comedy. Without further ado, I don't have a witty segue for this one. Diamond is Unbreakable takes place 11 years after the events of Stardust Crusaders in 1999. The most noticeable thing about this arc at first glance is that it's the first entry in the series to be set in a fictional district. Morio is modeled after the Japanese city Sendai, the hometown of the original manga's author Hirohiko Araki. In fact, DIU's setting was based off of Sendai's reconstruction from a historical town to a more residential area with new people moving in. Araki thought that using the real name of the city would anger some people, so he decided to change the name to Morio. What I particularly like about this arc is how its simplistic premise works off of an answer to some questions that Part 3 left, such as, how did Dio get a stand when it's heavily implied that they're inherited? How was he able to find so many other stand users to serve him in such a short amount of time? The answer given is that there's a magical arrow that can grant stand powers to whomever it pierces, as long as they have willpower strong enough to wield one. If they don't have strong willpower, then they suffer the same fate as my hopes and dreams. The rest of the arrow's history won't be explored until Golden Wind, but we'll get to that when we get to it. The main story of Diamond is Unbreakable centers around this arrow. After it's smuggled out of Egypt, it falls into the possession of several different people who use it to pierce citizens of Morio for their own personal reasons, creating numerous menaces in the humble city. It's up to members of the Joestar family and other allies to retrieve the arrow and defeat any threats that it creates by posing fabulously while their magic ghosts beat the shit out of each other. Half of the trouble that I had writing the script came down to how difficult it is to describe the story, as the first half is somewhat episodic and focuses on character establishment and world building, while the second half feels more story-oriented. This bit of change does seem to lead us into an entirely different show, but I'll explain what I think makes it work when I talk about the second half in part 2 of this review. There is some build up to the main villain in the first half where there are a couple scenes of someone handling a dismembered hand, giving a sense of mystery and suspense to the villain they're alluding to. Part 4 is not as long as the previous arc, coming in at only 39 episodes, so it doesn't feel as dragged out even if the pacing does feel a bit slow in some parts. It does use a similar formula as its predecessor in that there's a main threat that our heroes have to go out of their way to find while having to deal with the villain of the week. However, it takes a more lighthearted approach to it by having most of the enemies being befriended and 2 of our main leads being delightfully airheadish. The story begins with the returning protagonist from Stardust Crusaders, Jotaro Kujo, visiting Morio to meet RMC Josuke Higashikata to inform him of the discovery that he's the bastard son of Joseph Joestar.
父親の名前はやれやれ厄介な役目だぜ。父親の名前はジョセフ・ジョースター。
Here's a fun fact. On my first viewing of the first 3 arcs, I thought that Diamond is Unbreakable was part 3 and got a couple of episodes in before one of my friends kindly told me, "No, you fucking dumbass, this is part 4. Stardust Crusaders is part 3. To which I said, "Oh, that's why I have no idea what's going on," and then I started watching what I meant to in the first place. Can you imagine what was going through my head in just the first episode with no context from part 3? Why does everyone have reasonably sized bodies? I thought all of the important people were unhealthily muscular. Why is this guy's hat dissolving into his hair? Did they just grow arms? Are they aliens? Is that a buff Chansey? What is even happening? Wasn't this about vampire hunters? Needless to say, now that I have seen part 3, I'm able to follow the story more clearly. But seriously, JoJo goes from British musclemen who kill vampires with magic breathing, to people beating each other with their imaginary friends, to gangsters. It's so ridiculous, and I love it. Anyway, I guess now I should talk about the delinquent wannabe who's super defensive of his pompadour, my personal favorite JoJo. Josuke feels like an organic character as he displays a more pragmatic and down-to-earth personality than the show's previous protagonists. He's young, naive, and a bit of a dork. He's relatively polite and level-headed, but has a more goofy and mischievous side that's mainly prevalent when he's interacting with the supporting cast. It's refreshing for a show to give its protagonist the character of a typical teenager without making him bland or whiny. I especially love how offended he gets if someone dares to insult his fabulous hair. Just as you're starting to think that'll be a constant running gag, it's only done a small handful of times, which makes it much more enjoyable than gags where the MC gets triggered over something minor every 5 seconds. Yeah, I get it, FMA, Edward is short. It's not funny after the 10 millionth time. While Joseph is technically the show's best protagonist, Josuke is my favorite as I find him to be more relatable. I even think his stand is the most interesting in this arc. Instead of just giving Crazy Diamond generic super strength and waiting until the last few episodes to give a standout ability, the show gives it a unique power with a reasonable drawback. It can heal wounds and fix broken objects, however it can't heal Josuke's injuries and it can't bring people back to life. I see why they decided to make it look like a wrestler with a nurse fetish. It's an interesting power on its own, and it's open to different ways to use it, making for some very imaginative scenes. It's probably my favorite stand in this arc, but there is something about Crazy Diamond that I find odd. It's shown in a flashback that when Dio caused the Joestars to gain stands, Josuke got the same fever that Holly did. Now, Holly was deathly sick because she didn't have the willpower to control her stand, and she was relieved of it after Dio's defeat. So, if Josuke got the same fever, meaning that he didn't have the willpower to control his stand, then why did he get to keep it after Dio died? How come any of the Joestars got to keep their stands when it was clearly established that defeating Dio would take them away? Your plot holes from the last arc are leading to more plot holes in this one. By now, I should address the elephant in the room. The fact that Josuke is the result of an affair from Joseph is the one thing that a lot of people can't forgive about this arc. I was also a bit thrown by it at first, but now it's kinda whatever to me since I stopped caring about Joseph during part 3, and in part 4 he's only relevant for like 2 episodes. Besides, I'm pretty sure the only reason he married Susie was because his first choice got turned into a pancake. But I do get why it can't sit too well with some fans, as it does feel like an out-of-character move for someone established to be loyal and trusting. Joining RMC and Jotaro on their mission to protect Morio are assisting stand users who also wish to help their city. The first one introduced being Josuke's schoolmate Koichi, who interestingly starts as an ordinary person. Koichi is one of the citizens pierced by the arrow. He begins as an ordinary meek and passive boy, but as the story goes on, after he obtains his stand Echoes and forms a closer friendship with the rest of the main cast, he grows to be assertive and a useful ally. The one thing I find confusing about him is Echoes. Over the course of the show, Echoes evolves into 3 different stages, giving Koichi multiple powers. Echoes is the only stand that evolves in the arcs that have been animated because anime, I guess. Act 1 starts as a cute little bug that can send sound vibrating through someone by placing manga sound effect text on them. Act 2 is a slightly smaller bug that also uses sound effect text, but now when the text is touched, it produces a tangible effect equivalent to the sound effect. So obviously Act 3 will be something similar.
Okay, master. Let's kill the whole beach.
What? How do you go from a bug that uses sound effect text to a humanoid alien that makes objects heavier? And why can it talk now?
SHIT 了解しました
I mean, it has some very insightful things to say, but still. A funny thing I think I should mention is a moment in the opening segment. There's a short bit where Koichi is shown with an animation of Echoes next to him, but for the first couple of episodes, I guess they didn't want to give away the surprise. So they didn't play his stand's animation, just leaving him to make a stupid pose for a solid 2 seconds. It couldn't be more perfect even if it tried. Ah shit, now I'm obligated to talk about the symbolism in the rest of the openings, aren't I? I don't want to. Chase's best opening, don't at me. The first villains to be in possession of the stand arrow are the Nijimura brothers, Keicho and Okuyasu, characters introduced fairly early on in the 3rd episode. Their reasoning for using the arrow is to hopefully find a power that would free them from what they see as their family's curse. Their widowed father had a flesh bud implanted in his head by Dio that helped him to achieve great success, but made him grow more violent and abusive, similar to how it worked on Kakyoin and Polnareff in the last arc. After Dio's defeat, the Nijimura's dad became a green gunk-like creature that seemingly has no memory or semblance of being human, and that can't be killed as he unconsciously heals himself whenever he's hurt. Keicho smuggled the arrow from Egypt to try to find a stand that could kill this monster and put him out of his misery.
親父を殺してくれるスタンド使いを俺は探しているんだよ
If only I found a power like the one my brother has that can erase stuff. You know, I don't think I thought this through. When our MC hopes to prove that their dad does in fact remember and love his sons, Keicho's first thought is that he should continue his search as he's killed too many people to just turn back, despite Okuyasu insisting that they should stop what they're doing and try to move on. Before they can come to a conclusion, Keicho is killed when protecting Okuyasu from an anonymous stand user that steals the arrow from them. Now, the first time I saw these episodes explaining their backstory, I found it to be pretty pointless. It just seemed like they were introducing a plot point with the Nijimura's dad that wouldn't go anywhere, since we never see him die or become human again. I also found it idiotic how Okuyasu seemingly went through a complete personality change by immediately acting like an overly happy best friend to Josuke. But after further consideration, I don't really think the point was ever for their dad to die or become human again, as it's made clear that he still loves his sons and that he can't ever return to normal. This backstory instead works to show how Dio's return and death affected people other than the Joestars, which helps to tie Josuke to Okuyasu. It also works as a good overall background for our tritagonist, and sets up the arc he'll be experiencing amid the story.
俺の兄貴はよ死んで当然の男だったいつか誰かに殺されると思ってたぜ罪ってのはよそうなるようなことをしてりゃよどっかから回り回って罰がやってくるそれぐらい俺にだってわかるからな
Okuyasu makes for an interesting bad guy gone good, as it's only a small aspect of his character. He was never actually a villain, he was only acting by the decisions of Keicho. Even though he was aware that his brother went down an illicit path of no return, he still stayed with him out of the mindset that he was the only loved one that he still had, and feeling as if he was the only person he could put his trust in. It's shown that he also still saw the good that was in Keicho by recognizing that he died protecting him, and by wanting to apprehend his killer. While he does go through the whole revenge route that's to be expected, it's not the entirety or even the main focus of his arc. He instead receives the development of learning how to rely on himself and to make his own decisions, which is prominent in numerous scenes and has a satisfying payoff. I initially found it so contrived that Okuyasu immediately started acting overly friendly with our MC, but given the setup to his character, it makes narrative sense. He's now in a situation where the person he relied on for the majority of his life is dead, and he's left alone having to take care of what's essentially an inhuman monster. Josuke was the only other person who showed the smallest bit of concern for him, so it makes sense that he'd try to earn his trust and be his friend. I appreciate that the show doesn't do the whole, "you were once my enemy, so I won't trust you until we have an extremely forced bonding scene," nor does it immediately have Josuke returning the feelings of an overly happy best friend. He instead neutrally sees Okuyasu as an ally and starts naturally seeing him as a close friend over time. It's a refreshing take on a tired trope, and it's helped by the fact that they do have some interesting chemistry. I don't have any problem believing that these two are supposed to be best friends. Okuyasu helps to balance out the characters of our main leads with his overly happy and rambunctious personality. It helps to bring some levity, and it's interesting how there are signs of a depression that he uses a happy demeanor to help himself cope with. A common argument I've seen regarding Okuyasu is that he's basically a reskin of Polnareff from Stardust Crusaders. Personally, I don't get it. Of course, I do get where the comparison comes from. A headstrong meathead who's introduced as a villain soon becomes an ally and hopes that he can avenge his dead sibling, but remains with the cast after he gets his revenge because he's grown closer to them. But that's about where their similarities end. Polnareff had a somewhat strategic mind when it came to combat, whereas Okuyasu relies more on instinct and luck. Polnareff had to learn not to fight by himself. Okuyasu has to learn pretty much the exact opposite. Polnareff was an honor-bound warrior. Okuyasu is just kind of a goofball. Yes, they're similar, but I don't get the argument of calling Okuyasu a reskin. Admittedly, he doesn't beat Polnareff in terms of personality or combat scenes, but he is funnier, so I'll give him that. I guess I should talk about his stand, as it's the main problem a lot of people have with his character, and for good reasons. The hand, or as I like to call it, Pepsi Man Jr., can erase space to bring objects closer to it, or to bring itself closer to something, and it's implied that it can erase people. This super OP stand that could end any fight in a matter of seconds is rarely used when it's needed. There are multiple times where the episode would be over if Okuyasu would just bring objects closer to him, and he doesn't. They don't even give an excuse like, "Oh no, I got a hand cramp, so now I can't erase space. I'm trying to work with you, show, give me a break." He just doesn't use it. But hey, it could have been worse. They could have given him a detailed backstory, have him use his power once, and then just have him leave to never be of importance again. I'm coming for you next time, you waste of thought. In my Stardust Crusaders review, I said that Jotaro would work a lot better as a supporting protagonist rather than the main lead. And, for once in my life, I was right about something. Honestly, this feels like the role he was born to play. His serious, no-nonsense personality nicely lends itself to the mentor figure he's meant to be for Josuke, and it's great to see a more mature version of him, showing how much he's grown since the last arc. I also love how he's the stand expert now and is able to give our heroes advice during combat.
命中すると確信するまで発射するな。奥安、とどめは刺すな。俺たちがそこに行くまで待て。言ったはずだぜ、光一君。奴は追うな。君はエコースだ。自分の身を守ることだけを考えていればいい。
The way Jotaro's portrayed and the relationship that he has with Josuke is what I wish Part 3 could have done with Joseph, instead of nerfing him beyond belief and having him and Jotaro grow only slightly closer in the last few episodes. Picking up from the last season's ending, Star Platinum still has the ability to stop time. However, since Jotaro hasn't had a need to use it for the past 11 years, he's a bit rusty and is only able to use it minimally for a few seconds. It's a reasonable way to nerf him while still giving him a strong power, even if I'm still not too keen on the idea of giving him basically the same abilities as Dio. Now, enough about those boring good guys. It's time to talk about what makes every arc the villains. Like I said earlier, most of the enemies our heroes fight are either befriended or turn out to be a false threat. But every once in a while, Josuke turns them into tourist attractions. That manages to be cheesy, fucked up, and hilarious all at once. I love it. It provides a nice contrast from Stardust Crusaders, where most of the villains are hospitalized, and in Golden Wind, where they're straight up killed most of the time. It also adds a bit of color to this world. I mean, not everyone with powers that isn't a main character has to be a bad guy. Maybe they're just misunderstood, or maybe they're good at heart and are being misled, or maybe they're being understandably a bit too trigger-happy with their godlike powers. Personally, I don't have a magic ghost that does whatever I want it to, but I can guarantee that if I did, I would go completely wild with it with little to no regard about anything. If I can choose, I want Holly's stand because no one is using it anymore and it's pretty, goddammit. I will name it Livin' on a Prayer, and its powers will be editing my videos for me so I can focus more on that dumb webcomic that I've been working on for the past 6 years. While the last arc had more memorable villains and entertaining combat scenes, this arc still handles them fairly well. One villain is a midget nerd who attacks people that insult his waifu, another is a yandere with magic hair, one is a chef who cooks healthy food with an evil smile, and then there's my personal favorite, a self-absorbed manga artist who bullies children.
君の記憶をもらう。僕の漫画のネタにするためにね。
But that won't be until after the first few installments. Until then, it'll be about people fighting with magic breathing. And I won't plan anything after the third installment and write everything from then on in one draft without any regard for plot holes. Then this series will rise in popularity when it gets a corny and over-the-top adaptation in the 2010s. It's gonna be great. Seriously though, this is the most meta shit I've ever seen in my life.
お前が犬と猫を殺すのが好きなやつだと今教えたからな。
I don't have a joke for this scene, I just like imagining it's what happens to Araki whenever he leaves his house. A character that's not exactly introduced as a villain is Ayasuji with a stand named Cinderella that can change cosmetic features and is mainly only useful in Aya's salon where she gives women makeovers. She's only in a couple of episodes, but I bring her up because she'll be noteworthy in one important scene later, so just keep her in the back of your mind. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go cry in the corner at the fact that the salon will never be real. I don't think I can go much further without addressing the new difference in art style. When the manga was published, it had an art style that gave its men overly muscular bodies, which was typical of the trends at the time. But as the fads of the 80s started to end, Araki had to update the style to keep up with the times. He started focusing less on muscular body types and more on the style of clothing. When it came time for animating the show, David Productions took the styles to each arc and updated them to look more modern. I personally prefer the more macho Fist of the North Star-esque style, but the more fashion-based one is still visually pleasing. Stardust Crusaders is probably where the show peaked in terms of animation, but there are moments in Part 4 where the artwork and animation look really good. Then there are other times when they don't. Okay, I'm doing something a bit different by splitting this review into 2 different videos. Personally, I really don't like having to do this, but since it was recommended to me so often, I thought I'd at least try it. Do you think I should keep splitting my reviews in half if they get too long, or do you think I should just upload it all into one? With that, I'll hopefully see you in the next video, and I'm out!